Thank you. Our next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 21173 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau setting out a timetable for Stage 3 consideration of the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner Bill. Could I call on Graham Day to move this motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And no member has asked to speak on the motion. The question, therefore, is that motion 21173 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you very much. So we're going to turn now to Stage 3 proceedings for the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner Bill. Can I just check that members have with them the bill as amended at Stage 2, the marshalled list and the grouping of amendments. As normal, the grouping bell, the division bell will sound and proceedings will be suspended for 5 minutes for the first division of the afternoon. The period for voting for that first division will be 30 seconds, but normally it will be a minute for the first division after a grouping or a debate. Members who wish to speak in the debate on any group of amendments should press their request to speak button as soon as I call the group. So, turning to the bill itself and the marshalled list, can I call Amendment 19 in the name of John Finney, grouped with Amendments 23, 24, 25 and 26. John Finney to move Amendment 19 and to speak to all amendments in this group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I move Amendment 19. Presiding Officer, as we know, the pace of technological change in the field of biometric technologies is rapid. That's why it's vital that biometric technologies are expressly mentioned on the face of the bill. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and his colleagues for working with me to refine my amendments from Stage 2. The amendments now make clear that biometric technologies are as much a part of the Commissioner's scrutiny arrangements as biometric data, as I shall explain. Amendment 19 requires that when the Commissioner is reviewing the law, policy and practice relating to biometric data, or promoting public awareness of powers and duties that relevant policing bodies have in relation to biometric data, then the Commissioner must have regard to technology used or capable of being used for the purpose of acquiring, retaining, using or destroying biometric data. That phrase, capable of being used, is very important as it includes technology which is available for use but not yet deployed, such as facial recognition technology. The legal and ethical use of technology by Police Scotland is of course a matter which I and other members will view as being of great importance given its impact on human rights, such as the right to privacy. It is therefore important that this new Commissioner is able to provide views on such matters through reviews, the Code of Practice, reports and recommendations. With that in mind, Amendment 23 makes explicit that in a report issued under Section 15 of the Bill, the Commissioner may make a recommendation in relation to technologies used or capable of being used to collect, retain, use or destroy biometric data. Amendment 24 goes on to provide that where such a recommendation is made, then the Commissioner must rather than may, impose a requirement to respond on the relevant policing body. This is important for promoting transparency and accountability. These amendments work with the existing provisions in Section 16 so that the person on whom a requirement to respond is imposed must provide a written statement to the Commissioner setting out the action they are taking or not taking in response to the recommendation. Thereafter, the Commissioner is required to publish the written statement and lay it before Parliament, as already provided for in Section 17. Amendment 25 clarifies that where a recommendation issued under Section 15 does not relate to biometrics technology, then the Commissioner can choose whether or not to impose a requirement to respond. Amendment 26 is a minor consequential amendment associated with Amendment 24. Taken together, I believe that this is a package of amendments makes for a stronger scrutiny arrangements and greater transparency around the use and potential use of biometric technologies. I move Amendment 19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Finney. No other member has indicated they wish to speak. Therefore, could I call on the Cabinet Secretary to respond?
Presiding Officer, just briefly at Stage 2, John Finney agreed to work with me to refine his intended amendments, which aim to make explicit reference to biometric technologies in the bill. I'm pleased that we were able to build on Mr Finney's original amendment to make it even more effective in terms of its coverage and relevance as far as the Commissioner's general functions are concerned. I would particularly highlight that, as Mr Finney has just explained, the amendment now covers both technology in use, but also importantly, technology capable of being used. This means, for example, that, as Mr Finney has already referenced, facial recognition technology, which is not currently being deployed by Police Scotland, but is certainly will be available for use by them in the future, could be deployed by Police Scotland in the future, and therefore the Commissioner could include guidance about facial recognition technology in the Code of Practice or carry out a review of the law which relates to the use of this technology. So I support very much this group of amendments in John Finney's name, and I urge others to support them as well.
Thank you very much. Does John Finney wish to add anything further?
Nothing to add. Thank you, President Officer.
Thank you very much. So the question is that Amendment 19 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. We're going to turn now to Group 2, which are minor and technical amendments. Could I call Amendment 20 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with Amendments 21, 9, 22, 12, 27 and 28. The Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 20 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I move Amendment 20, and of course I will speak to all the amendments in my name. The amendments in my name really make minor and technical changes to the bill. Amendment 20 and 21 adjust Section 2, subsection 7, to move the definition of children and young persons from after the definition of vulnerable persons to before it. This just simply allows the list to be arranged alphabetically, and we know that civil servants love alphabetically ordering lists. The definition itself remains unchanged, therefore these amendments are for tidying up purposes. In a similar vein, Amendments 22 and 27 make a minor adjustment or adjustments to references to the Code of Practice at various points in the bill. Amendment 28 adjusts paragraph 11 of Schedule 1 so that the Commissioner must obtain the consent of the Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body as to the number of staff which the Commissioner may appoint. This amendment provides a means for the SPCB to manage staff numbers to assure the efficiency of the Commissioner's office. I now turn to Amendments 9 and 12 in the name of Liam Kerr. These are technical amendments which I'm happy to support. Section 6A lists a number of issues which the Commissioner is to have regards to when preparing the Code of Practice. These matters are currently termed as quote-unquote principles. However, the matters are not framed as principles, and therefore Amendments 9 and 12 replace the reference to principles while still ensuring that regard is to be had to the importance of these matters. The amendments also remove the express reference to revised codes of practice so that revised codes are dealt with in a consistent way in the bill as provided for by my Amendments 22 and 27. So I'd like to thank Liam Kerr for agreeing at stage 2 to work with me and my officials on this amendment and getting to what I think is a very constructive space in this regard. So I move Amendment 20 in my name.
Thank you very much. And I call Liam Kerr to speak to Amendment 9 and the other amendments in this group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for indicating his support for Amendments 9 and 12 in my name. These are, as he says, technical amendments which refine my Stage 2 amendments in relation to Section 6A of the bill. At Stage 2, I inserted a requirement for the Commissioner to have regard to certain important high-level principles when preparing a Code of Practice. A new Section 6A was inserted in the bill as a result. Now, through Amendment 12, I now propose to change the opening words to Section 6A so the Commissioner, when preparing a draft Code of Practice, is to have regard to the importance of the matters listed in that section, rather than referring to those matters as principles. That's because I recognise, as the Cabinet Secretary has mentioned, the matters listed in that amendment were not actually framed as principles. The new amendment preserves the importance of the matters listed, including the promotion and protection of human rights and ensuring the safety of individuals and communities. And it still requires the Commissioner to have regard to them when preparing a Code of Practice. And I'm sure... Yes, of course, Mr.
John Finney.
Thank you, Senator. I'm grateful for the member taking intervention. The member will recall that at Stage 2 we moved from from have regard to comply with all the arguments about the strengthening of that. Can the member explain, because I'm not persuaded at this time that moving to a situation where we have regard to the importance of is anything other than a downgrading of a principle. So it may just be semantics, and I'm not meaning to be pedantic with you on this issue, but you know, when you are talking about promoting and protecting human rights, when you're talking about the individual's rights to privacy, these seem to me to be core principles rather than something you should have regard to. Could you clarify that, please?
Liam Kerr.
Yes, of course. I'm very grateful to Mr. Finney for coming in. The way the amendment was originally drafted spoke to principles. It said you have to have regard to the following principles, but the list of what were designated as principles were not in fact framed as principles. So the redrafted amendment sets out that what follows are not to be considered to be principles, because they're not. It's a semantic point. What they are, in fact, are statements of this is what must be complied with. Does that make sense, Mr. Finney? Have I explained that reasonably well? Or?
John Finney.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, to a point, Mr. Cairn. Thank you for taking the intervention again. But surely it's a very sound principle that we should all be promoting and protecting human rights, rather than having regard to the importance of. I'm genuinely trying to understand, because I want this to be consensual, please.
Liam.
No, and it is, I'm very grateful. It is an important point. The Amendment 6A, as drafted at stage 2, refers to the Commissioner having regard to the following principles. But then when you look at 6A, A to D, these are not, in fact, principles. The statements as drafted are not in the form of principles as such, which is why it would be semantically wrong to keep referring to them as the following principles, because they're not principles. So it's entirely a semantic point, and the amendment tidies that up such that the Commissioner, a draft code of practice, the Commissioner must have regard to the importance of the following things, which are not principles because they have not been drafted as principles. So I guess I'm slightly asking you to trust me on this one, Mr. Finney. Come on. But semantically, the reason for the change is a semantic one, because as drafted at stage 2, it was referring to principles which are not principles. We'll see if you go with me on that one, Mr. Finney. Amendment 12 also deletes the specific mention of revised codes in order to allow this to be dealt with in a uniform way across the bill, as the Cabinet Secretary proposes. But crucially, it remains the case that regard must be had to the importance of matters set out in Section 6A when preparing a revised code of practice. Amendment 9, on the other hand, is a consequential change, because the reference to quotes, principles is being removed from Section 6A. The reference to principles inserted to Section 6.1 is also to be removed. Finally, then, obviously, I thank the Cabinet Secretary for Justice for working with me to refine these amendments, and I would ask members to support Amendments 9 and 12 in my name.
Thank you very much. And could I call on the Cabinet Secretary to conclude in this, or wind up in this section? No further comments. In that case, we're going to move to the question. The question is that Amendment 20 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 21 and ask the Cabinet Secretary to move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 21 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. We're going to turn now to Group 3, which is an advisory group. Can I call Amendment 6 in the name of Liam MacArthur, grouped with Amendment 18, and Liam MacArthur to move Amendment 6 and speak to both amendments in this group.
Thanks very much, President Officer. Continuing in the generally consensual tone, Amendments 6 and 18 put the advisory group on a statutory footing. This was a recommendation unanimously supported by the committee, as well as many of the stakeholders and witnesses who gave evidence. Yet it appeared nowhere in the original bill, an omission described at the time by the Scottish Human Rights Commission as regrettable. At stage 2, the Cabinet Secretary committed in principle to putting this group on a statutory footing if work could be done to revise the wording. I accepted that proposal, and these amendments reflect that collaborative work. The new Section 22A allows the Commissioner to make decisions on governance, remuneration and membership of the group with the consent of the SPCB where appropriate. The new section would also allow for the group to provide advice on all matters relating to the Commissioner's functions. I believe this better reflects the approach of the bill in recognising the need to respond, as John Finney was referring to earlier, to a rapidly changing biometrics environment. And on that basis, I thank the Cabinet Secretary and his officials for their assistance in coming to this point. Look forward to any further debate and would encourage Parliament to support Amendment 6, which I move.
Thank you very much. And I call, no other member has indicated they wish to speak, so I call on the Cabinet Secretary to respond.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. At stage 2, Liam MacArthur agreed to work with me and my officials to refine his amendment, which, as he rightly says, of course, aimed to establish an advisory group to provide advice to the Commissioner on legal and ethical issues relating to biometric data and technologies. I'm pleased that we were able to make constructive adjustments to the stage 2 amendment, which will now simplify how the membership, remuneration and governance arrangements of the group are determined. They also allow for greater flexibility in the group's remit. I've always supported the setting up of such a group, as I very much recognise the importance of crucially independent, but also well-informed advice being available to the Commissioner. My concern was that in committing this to legislation, we risked losing some flexibility. However, Liam MacArthur's Amendment 18 now ensures that matters are kept as open and flexible as they can be. This Stage 3 amendment also removes the opportunity for Scottish ministers to steer the operation of the group and instead places the decision-making with the Commissioner, which is exactly as it should be. It's vital to the credibility of this group that it remains impartial and, of course, seen to be impartial. I also agree that there should be a role for the Scottish Parliament corporate body in overseeing and approving the appointments process, the number of members and the remuneration and allowances for the group to ensure transparency and value for money. So can I thank Liam MacArthur for the constructive way he's approached these amendments, and we were pleased to get to a resolution on them, and I hope that other members will support the amendments in Liam MacArthur's name.
Thank you. And does Liam MacArthur wish to make any concluding remarks?
I don't think it, no.
Thank you very much. So the question is that Amendment 6 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you. We turn to Group 4, Complaints Procedure. Can I call Amendment 7 in the name of Margaret Mitchell, grouped with Amendment 5, and Margaret Mitchell to move Amendment 7 and speak to both amendments in this group?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Amendment 7 replaces in full the amendment that I lodged at Stage 2, which required the Commissioner to put in place a procedure by which a person may make a complaint to the Commissioner about the handling of their biometric data. My intention was to ensure that members of the public had the ability to complain directly to the Commissioner if they believed that their biometric data had not been properly dealt with by the police bodies which fall within the oversight of the Commissioner, and that remains my intention. However, I've listened very carefully to concerns expressed both by the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and the Information Commissioner's Office that it should be clear that the complaints made via the procedure are to relate to breaches of the Code of Practice, and I've worked with the Cabinet Secretary to ensure the provisions now make this clear. The remainder of the amendment is very similar to my Stage 2 amendment and broadly achieves the same aim, as I shall now explain. Amendment 7 requires the Commissioner to provide a procedure so that it's clear that the Commissioner is not just to establish a procedure but also to retain it. The procedure is to allow an individual or their representative to make a complaint about a breach of the Code of Practice in relation to that individual's biometric data. The procedure is to apply to complaints in respect of any body which is subject to the Code of Practice under Section 7(1). This flexibility will allow the provision to cover any additional bodies which may be made subject to the Code later by means of regulations under Section 7(4). The procedure is to be available whether or not the individual has already instigated a complaint through the complaints mechanism of the body they are complaining about. In determining the procedure, the Commissioner is to consult various persons, including the Information Commissioner. This provision recognises the importance of the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner and the Information Commissioner working together to ensure that complaints are directed to the appropriate Commissioner. The procedure put in place by the Biometrics Commissioner will deal with complaints regarding failures to comply with the Code, while the Information Commissioner will continue to deal with complaints about infringements of data protection legislation. Therefore, Amendment 7 sets out comprehensive arguments to enable individuals to raise complaints relating to the Code directly with the Commissioner. Amendment 5 moves the location of Section 5A so that it will now appear after Section 10 of the Bill among the sections which deal with the Code of Practice, as complaints procedure is now clearly about complaints relating to a breach of the Code of Practice. This is a more suitable location. I move Amendment 7 in my name.
Thank you very much. And I call James Kelly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I indicate support for the amendments in this group? And can I go on to state that I believe that if the Biometrics Commissioner is to have the confidence of the public, then it's important that we've got appropriate processes that underpin the Biometric Commissioner's work. One of the gaps in the original legislation was a lack of a complaints procedure, and the amendments at stage 2 address that. The amendments have been brought forward today by Margaret Mitchell, and I acknowledge the work that's gone with the Cabinet Secretary's team, refine and clarify the complaints procedure so that it's clear what complaints will go to the Information Commissioner and what complaints to the Biometrics Commissioner. So I think overall the package of amendments from stage 2 to stage 3 make the bill more stronger in this area.
Thank you very much, Mr Kelly. And can I call the Cabinet Secretary to respond on behalf of the Government?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the Chamber may be aware, I did not support the Stage 2 amendments which Margaret Mitchell brought forward, requiring the Commissioner to set up a complaints procedure. I was concerned at that time that the amendment could lead to duplication or disagreement between the Information Commissioner and the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner in relation to complaints about biometric data. This is because the Stage 2 amendment didn't delimit the role of the Biometrics Commissioner and would have allowed the Commissioner to deal with complaints about breaches of data protection law that should properly be dealt with by the Information Commissioner. However, I'm pleased that Margaret Mitchell has not only taken on board my concerns, but constructively worked with me and my officials, but also taken on board the concerns of the Information Commissioner as set out at stage 2, so that the stage 3 amendments now limit the complaints procedure, I think quite rightly, to breaches of the Code of Practice. The amendment also fixes a number of other technical points, so I thank Margaret Mitchell for working with me to refine the amendments for stage 3, and I will be supporting the amendments 7 and 5 and urge others to do so as well.
Thank you very much. And can I ask if Margaret Mitchell wishes to make any concluding remarks?
Yeah. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just to say I welcome the Cabinet Secretary endorsement of these amendments, and I thank him and his officials for working collaboratively with me to improve this amendment. I think we're all agreed it's important that there should be a clear process for individuals to complain in relation to breaches of the Code of Practice which affect them directly, and happily the amendment before us does precisely that.
Thank you very much. So the question is that Amendment 7 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I also call Amendment 5 in the name of Margaret Mitchell? Margaret Mitchell to move.
Move.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 5 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Turn now to Group 5, Post-Legislative Scrutiny. Can I call Amendment 8 in the name of Lee MacArthur in a group on its own? Lee MacArthur to move and speak to the amendment.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Amendment 8 follows my Stage 2 amendment, allowing for a process of review. Amendment 8 fine-tunes what was passed at Stage 2 by making minor drafting changes and altering the timing requirements so that the reviews can be linked to the Commissioner's strategic plan. Where a review is considered unnecessary, my amendment would also require a statement to be made setting out the rationale for that. As I said, at Stage 2, new biometric technologies are being developed at a pace that primary legislation cannot match. Putting in place a framework alongside mechanisms for reviewing and updating is therefore essential. Amnesty, the Law Society, open rights groups and the Scottish Human Rights Commission all raise concerns about the Commissioner's scope in their evidence, and this may indeed need to be revisited in due course. For now, I'm again grateful to the Cabinet Secretary and his officials for working with me to put in place measures that will at least allow reviews to happen in the future. As the Law Society say in their briefing, these reviews should not be seen as a drain on resources, but, quote, necessary checks to ensure the high degree of transparency of the role which is required. I accept, however, that the most important thing is that these reviews are capable of responding to circumstances, and in some cases that may mean a review is not actually required. But at this point I move Amendment 8 in my name.
Thank you very much. And can I invite, no other members indicated they wish to speak, can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to respond?
Presiding Officer, at Stage 2, Lee MacArthur agreed to work with me to refine his amendment, which required Scottish Ministers to undertake a review of the Commissioner's remit and functions at recurring intervals. As I said at Stage 2, post-legislative scrutiny is of course extremely important. Also, I did say at Stage 2, I don't think the bill needs to provide for it. I think it is a matter better left to Ministers and Parliament to determine without being tied to predetermined periods. However, I recognise that the Parliament wishes to legislate for this now, and I respect that. I was therefore keen that we revisited the amendment to make sure that it would work in a sensible manner in a way that could achieve the most effective scrutiny possible. In adjusting that amendment, I'm pleased that Liam MacArthur recognises the benefit of linking the timing of the first post-legislative review to the end of the first strategic planning period, rather than to 3 years after royal assent. This allows the examination of the Commissioner's functions to be more meaningful and to consider whether the Commissioner has been able to achieve all they set out to achieve. Amendment 8 also recognises that there may be times when it's not necessary to conduct subsequent reviews, in which case Scottish ministers are able to publish a statement to that effect and lay that before Parliament. This allows for, I think, a very common sense approach while retaining the need for transparency, as Parliament would be able to question ministers about the decisions not to conduct a review. So I very much support Liam MacArthur's Amendment 8 and would urge all members to do likewise.
And can I ask Mr MacArthur if he wishes to make any concluding remarks?
I would just thank the Government for their support and move the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the question is that Amendment 8 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 9? This was debated earlier. Liam Kerr to move or remove.
Moved.
That is moved. The question is that Amendment 9 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Turning now to Group 6 on the Code of Practice retention periods. Can I call Amendment 10 in the name of Liam MacArthur, grouped with Amendment 11? Liam MacArthur to move Amendment 10 and speak to both amendments.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Amendments 10 and 11 are again a revised version of what I pressed at stage 2. They have been proposed in recognition of the fact that there is currently a gap in the regulation of retention periods of biometric data. While DNA and fingerprints are regulated under the Criminal Procedure Scotland Act 1995, photos and other forms of biometric data are not. During the passage of this bill, research by Scottish Liberal Democrats found that over 375,000 images had been supplied to the Police National Database from Police Scotland's criminal history system since 2014. Those images were uploaded without a clear legislative requirement for their deletion in the event of the person pictured being found innocent. I recognise that facial recognition could be valuable for modernising the way police investigate crime, but unregulated it represents a potentially serious threat to human rights and civil liberties. I believe these provisions will provide both a safeguard for those liberties and the necessary framework to allow the proportionate and legitimate use of these technologies. The Ada Lovelace Institute found that, quote, people fear the normalisation of surveillance, but are prepared to accept facial recognition technology when there is a clear public benefit, provided safeguards are in place. In evidence to the Justice Subcommittee, Temporary Assistant Chief Constable Duncan Sloan said that the current rules around what the police can do with images of the public are, quote, not as clear as the rules around fingerprints and DNA. He went on to add that new governance arrangements would be absolutely valued and very much welcomed. Mr Sloan's colleague, DSC Sean Scott, also supported the Independent Advisory Group's recommendation on a presumption for deletion of biometric data as a central part of the oversight system established by the bill. He stated that, quote, one of the IAG's 9 recommendations was about the retention periods and a presumption of deletion, and that is absolutely right. There needs to be enough flexibility to allow for specific circumstances to be taken into consideration. However, putting retention periods in black and white will not only strengthen privacy rights, but also public confidence in the use of these technologies. For public authorities, that provides a much better basis on which to deploy such technologies. And I move Amendment 10 in my name.
Thank you very much. And no other member has indicated they wish to speak. Could I call on the Cabinet Secretary to respond?
As the Chamber may be aware, I have committed to conducting a review of retention periods once the new Commissioner is in place. Therefore, I was very interested in the amendments lodged by Liam MacArthur at stage 2, which require the Code of Practice to provide for presumption of a fixed 3-year retention period for all biometric data. I had a number of concerns about that, as I set out in detail at stage 2, which is why I now welcome Liam MacArthur's more flexible amendment on retention periods, which allows what I think is more nuanced rules to be provided for. In particular, it will allow different periods to be specified in different cases and avoid settling now upon the period which must be specified. The new amendment will also ensure that the provision which the Code of Practice is required to make will be focused only on cases where there is an existing legislative gap. This will help to avoid the risk of contradictory legal provision being made. This is because it will avoid the code being required to set out rules of retention periods for types of biometric data which are already suitably covered by legislation. I support Liam MacArthur's amendments 10 and 11 and would urge members to vote in favour of them.
Thank you. And can I ask if Liam MacArthur wishes to add any comments?
No.
Thank you very much. So the question is that Amendment 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 22, in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, debated earlier, Cabinet Secretary to move?
Moved.
Thank you very much. The question is that Amendment 22 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I invite Liam MacArthur to move Amendment 11?
Moved.
Thank you very much. The question is that Amendment 11 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I also ask Liam Kerr, this is, to move Amendment 12, debated earlier?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 12 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. We're going to turn now to Group 7, reporting on failures to comply with the Code of Practice. Can I call Amendment 13 in the name of Liam MacArthur, grouped with Amendments 14, 15, 16 and 17? Liam MacArthur to move Amendment 13 and speak to all the amendments.
Thank you again, Presiding Officer. Amendments 13 to 17 would mean that under Section 15, the Commissioner is required to prepare and publish reports about failures by relevant bodies to comply with the Code of Practice. At Stage 2, the Cabinet Secretary maintained that the Bill's strength can be found in the coercive powers of naming and shaming, observing that, quote, the power of reputational damage should not be underestimated. That always seemed to be open to too much of a risk, one that some might be willing to take, and I'm grateful, therefore, that Mr Youssef has come round to this view. In turn, I accept that these reports may be amalgamated if appropriate, and should certainly recognise a de minimis threshold, not least to avoid any undue burden being placed upon the Commissioner. I'm pleased, however, that these amendments strike a proportionate balance, and a pleasure in moving Amendment 13 in my name.
Thank you very much. And again, no member has indicated they wish to speak. Can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to respond on behalf of the Government?
Well, just very briefly, Presiding Officer, as Liam MacArthur has already said, this group of amendments in his name requires the Commissioner to prepare and publish a report about failures to comply with the Code of Practice, removing the discretionary power to prepare and publish reports in that regard. Monitoring and reporting in compliance with the Code of Practice has always been expected to be a key aspect of the Commissioner's role, and therefore I take no issue with these amendments at all. I'm very pleased, as Liam MacArthur has already alluded to, that we have, I think, a very now practical approach that's been built into the amendments, so that the Commissioner can choose not to report on a failure where it may be a very minor infraction, and also so that combined reports may be produced on failures to comply by more than one person, such as where there's a common theme, for example. So I support very much these amendments, and thank Liam MacArthur for working constructively with me and my officials to refine them for Stage 3, and hope other members will also support.
Thank you very much. Liam MacArthur, any further comments to conclude?
Only to thank the Government again for the cooperation. I suspect that the workings of these provisions may be something that will be reviewed in future, depending on the evidence that's forthcoming. But again, very much welcome the support the Government's given to coming to this point.
Thank you very much. So the question is that Amendment 13 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I ask Liam MacArthur to move Amendment 14?
Moved.
That is moved. The question is that Amendment 14 be agreed to. Are we agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I ask Liam MacArthur to move Amendment 15?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 15 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I invite Liam MacArthur to move Amendment 16?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 16 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. Can I ask John Finney to move Amendment 23, debated earlier?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. The question is that Amendment 23 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. And could I ask John Finney to move Amendment 24, also debated earlier?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. That is moved. The question is that Amendment 24 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Could I invite Liam MacArthur to move Amendment 17?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 17 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I invite John Finney to move Amendment 25, debated earlier?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 25 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I invite John Finney to move Amendment 26?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. The question is that Amendment 26 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I ask Liam MacArthur to move Amendment 18, debated earlier?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 18 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Could I ask the Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 27, debated earlier?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 27 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 28, also debated earlier?
Moved.
Thank you very much. The question is that Amendment 28 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed, and that ends consideration of amendments. Now, as members will be aware, at this stage in proceedings, I may require understanding orders to decide whether or not any provision in this bill relates to a protected subject matter. That is, whether it amends the franchise or the electoral system for Scottish parliamentary elections. In the case of this bill, in my view, no provision does any such thing. Therefore, the bill does not require a supermajority to be passed at stage 3. Now, we're going to move on to the next item of business. Can I just check with members? Are we quite happy to move on? Should we are. All right, we'll just take a short pause and then we'll move on. A short pause.
Thank you. The next item of business is a stage 3 debate on motion 21174 in the name of Hamza Youssef on the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner Bill. Can I ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now? And I call on Hamza Youssef to speak to and move the motion. Cabinet Secretary, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to open this stage 3 debate on the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner Bill. Can I thank my officials, of course, for the drafting of this bill, working so constructively with members of the opposition. Can I also thank members of the opposition for also similarly taking such a constructive approach. I've been involved in introducing legislation to this Parliament as a Minister for just over 7.5 years, and I don't think I've ever passed a bill with so much consensus and no voting against a single amendment during stage 3. It's only taken me 7.5 years to get there, but I'm delighted we have got to that. And on an issue that is understandably, I think, quite contentious and often quite controversial. But what we have now is an important piece of legislation which speaks to some of the very key societal issues of our time, touching on human rights, ethics, as they relate to police use of very personal information. A hugely topical issue, and one that I suspect members right across this chamber have been approached by members of the public in their own constituencies many at a time. The origins of this bill, however, go back a number of years, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank John Scott and his advisory group for shining a spotlight on biometric data and policing and criminal justice. Their report in 2018 was very much at the genesis, the inspiration for this bill. I'd also like to thank the various parliamentary committees who scrutinised this bill and its accompanying documents, especially, of course, the convener Margaret Mitchell on the Justice Committee. This bill, quite rightly, has attracted interest from a wide range of organisations and individuals. I'm again grateful to those stakeholders for their considered views they offered the Scottish Government during the preparatory phase of the bill, and also to the Justice Committee once the bill was introduced to Parliament. I was pleased that there was a broad consensus to agree the general principles of the bill in January. The Justice Committee did, however, make a number of detailed recommendations in its Stage 1 report, and I'm pleased to have been able to work with members to address those concerns during Stage 1, during Stage 2, and getting to this important stage today. I therefore welcome the cross-party support for the bill and the very positive engagement I've had with parliamentarians to ensure that the new legislation does what we want it to do. The bill will go a long way to delivering greater transparency and accountability, does what we want it to do. The bill will go a long way to delivering greater transparency and accountability in how the police use biometric data in Scotland. How important it is that, on the one hand, we absolutely equip our police officers with the necessary technology to ensure they can keep us safe. However, on the other hand, equally, let me stress how important it is that the public have absolute confidence in those technological advances and how their data will be collected, retained or indeed disposed. This bill, the new Independent Commissioner and the Code of Practice will hopefully help to provide members of the public with the reassurances they require. In this afternoon's debate, I want to focus on some key areas of the bill and what we want to achieve through it. First and foremost, the bill will make sure that our approach to biometric data, including new technologies such as facial recognition software, which has already been mentioned today, is effective, proportionate and, crucially, ethical. The bill creates an independent commissioner to advise on these issues and to review the relevant law, policy and practice. The policing bodies which the Commissioner will oversee are Police Scotland, the Scottish Police Authority, the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, but the bill includes a power so that ministers can add further bodies which operate in the context of policing and criminal justice at a later date, should that be required. And I absolutely think that policing, and these bodies in particular, are the absolute right place to start, because we know the collection, the retention of data for policing purposes, it can be very, very different to the collection and retention of personal data, or indeed biometric data, by any other sector. The Commissioner will also prepare a statutory code of practice, which will set out mandatory standards these bodies must meet and the responsibilities they must undertake, with the aims of ensuring good practice, driving continuous improvement and enhancing accountability. The content of the code has deliberately not been specified in the bill. This is to allow for flexibility and future-proofing. We are all aware of how quickly the pace of technology can move, but also to preserve, which I think is crucial, the impartiality and independence of the Commissioner, allowing the Commissioner to use his or her own judgment in the future. The Commissioner can also draw on expertise from the statutory advisory group. Any draft code of practice will be subject to consultation with specified bodies and to the approval of this Parliament before coming into effect. The code will be published so that everyone can see the standards that are expected of the bodies mentioned in the bill. The Commissioner will have powers to obtain information and to make reports and recommendations. I expect that the relationship between bodies subject to the code of practice and the Commissioner will therefore be predicated on transparency and accountability. We heard at stage 2 evidence gathering, before stage 2, sorry, at stage 1, during the evidence gathering stage, how important that dynamic between the bodies and the Commissioner was when we heard from the English and Welsh Commissioner. There will be a complaints procedure as well, as we've just heard, so that members of the public can raise concerns with the Commissioner about failures to comply with the Code of Practice. The Commissioner will also have substantial powers, I would say have teeth. They can report any failures to comply to Parliament, as well as issuing compliance notices requiring that any concerns be addressed. In the most extreme cases, the Commissioner can ultimately report failures to comply to the Court of Session. Finally, but importantly, the Commissioner will play a major role in raising public awareness about rights, responsibilities and standards used in biometric data and technologies. Given the rapid increase in the use of biometric data and technologies in recent years, it's absolutely vital that we promote a clearer understanding of these issues in our communities, especially, I would say, for young people, but also for vulnerable people as well. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, the biometrics field is evolving rapidly. It offers great potential, of course, in detection, prevention and the prosecution of crime, which keeps our communities safe. But the use of biometric data and the technologies also raises ethical and human rights considerations. Therefore, I want to make sure that the use of biometric data, including new technologies such as facial recognition software, is effective, it is lawful and is ethical. The bill creates a Biometrics Commissioner whose powers and duties are focused on rights, accountabilities and responsibilities. And since the bill was introduced, there's been a lot of discussion here at Parliament about biometric data, but it's now time, I think, to absolutely have that national discussion about the ethics and human rights associated with police use of biometric data, and for the new Commissioner to absolutely lead the forefront that discussion. So if Parliament agrees to this bill today, then this will place Scotland, I think, at the forefront of driving forward transparency, accountability and improvement in relation to biometric data for policing and criminal justice purposes. And I thank once again members for working extremely constructively to get us to this stage, and move that the Parliament agrees that a Scottish Biometrics Commissioner Bill be passed today.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. Now call William Kerr to open for the Conservatives. Mr Kerr, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very pleased to open this Stage 3 debate on the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner Bill on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. I confirm we will be voting for it to pass at decision time tonight. The underlying principle of this bill is to address ethical and human rights considerations in Scotland in relation to the collection, use, retention and disposal of biometric data in the context of policing and criminal justice. It seeks to do this by establishing the post of a Scottish Biometrics Commissioner who will draw up a code of practice governing how biometric material should be used, gathered and so on. This is a significant role. The bill also seeks to underpin public trust in the way the police use biometric data, and that trust is recognised in the bill's policy memorandum, where being seen to promote the confidence of the public was essential in relation to the Commissioner's functions, requiring that the governance arrangements for the Commissioner must be, and be seen to be, transparent, accountable and free of any undue influence. We all no doubt hope that that can be achieved. And ultimately, whether or not it is, will at least partly be around the resourcing. As the Law Society says, resources need to include funding for research, public consultations, marketing and legal advice. Promoting and knowledge of the Commissioner's role is going to be very important. The committee's report was stark. Other SPCB-supported office holders have faced resourcing issues as a result of changes or expansion to their role and powers over time, or as a result of growing demand for activity. So the committee's conclusion that the financial memorandum may not sufficiently estimate the resources which may be needed to support the delivery of the Commissioner's functions remains a concern, not least because I've read with interest the supplementary financial memorandum, which projects an extra couple of £100,000 due to the Stage 2 amendments. Now, I note Section 22 on the preparation of an annual report, but this doesn't mandate an explicit requirement to report on the adequacy of resources. That remains a concern, and I hope we'd see the Commissioner going wide in the interpretation of Section 22 to include those issues of resources. Moving on, the Code of Practice is of course fundamental and set out in Section 6. This has been a major area for amendment, and rightly so. During this process, the Cabinet Secretary amended the bill to provide greater parliamentary scrutiny of the first Code of Practice by ensuring the Commissioner must lay a copy of the first draft code before Parliament for representations. That's a good development, and one which should help towards the public trust and accountability desired. Within that Code of Practice, the committee agreed that the promotion and protection of human rights, privacy, public confidence and community safety are crucial. Noting that, at Stage 2, I inserted a requirement for the Commissioner to have regard to these when preparing a Code of Practice. And I'm very pleased that the Parliament agreed my further amendments early this afternoon, and that John Finney trusts me enough that the clause is as tight as it can be. And on that note, I think Liam MacArthur's points and amendments around the Code of Practice retention periods particularly are well made, and the greater nuance that we built in this afternoon is welcome. Now, at Stage 1, many on the committee raised concerns about a complaint mechanism and the possible impact on public confidence of not having one. Initially, the bill didn't contain any provision whereby a member of the public could raise concerns about the use of their biometric data by the police or a breach of the Code of Practice with the Commissioner. As such, the committee recommended that a complaint mechanism be included in the bill. Margaret Mitchell amended the bill to include a complaints process, which we further amended today. She'll talk in greater detail later, but I believe it's welcome that the Commissioner is required to establish and retain a complaints procedure which allows people to make a complaint to the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner about a breach of the Code of Practice. The amendment also states the Commissioner is to publicise the procedure, which will help raise public awareness of their rights relating to biometric data use by the police and justice system. Finally, Presiding Officer, it is trite that biometric data is developing all the time and changing. None of us can possibly know what the category biometric data will comprise in the future. Building in future-proofing in connection with the Commissioner's role and functions is essential. And that's why Liam MacArthur's Section 22A amendment at Stage 2 regarding an ethics advisory group was welcomed. He has, of course, further amended that today to create an advisory group which will allow the Commissioner more flexibility. Staying with Mr MacArthur, he included at Stage 2 Section 5B of the bill to allow the powers and functions of the Commissioner to be reviewed 3 years after the bill received royal assent and at the end of 5 years after review under that section. His amendment today, which tightened that up and links it to the publication of the Commissioner's strategic plan, makes sense and I think should be welcome. In summary, Presiding Officer, this is a good bill which has been subject to considered and sensible amendments throughout this legislative process, following extensive and exhaustive evidence taking at the committee stage. There followed reflective and collaborative working, as mentioned earlier by the Cabinet Secretary. And it's my view that what has emerged is a strong piece of legislation which achieves its stated aims to establish the Office of Scottish Biometrics Commissioner and to provide for its functions in relation to the acquisition, retention, use and destruction of biometric data for criminal justice and police purposes. And for that reason, Presiding Officer, we shall support it at decision time this evening.
Thank you very much, Mr Kelly. I call on James Kelly to open for Labour. Mr Kelly, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to open the Stage 3 debate on behalf of Scottish Labour and confirm that Scottish Labour will be supporting the bill at decision time this evening. And I've enjoyed this afternoon's very consensual proceedings. I mean, I think the advance of technology, John Finney was right earlier on when he spoke in one of his amendments to separate out technology and data. So there's been dramatic advances in technology, which therefore have ensured that data can be, much more data can be collected, and you know, data can be held more easily. And that is of great advantage in the criminal justice system. It helps police and prosecutors do their jobs in bringing people to justice and giving victims reassurance where they have, you know, they've had to suffer as a result of unjust crimes. However, the other side of that is that there's an ethics, as the Cabinet Secretary said, there's an ethics and human rights side to this, in that a lot more data has been held, and we have to ensure that the ethics that underpin that are robust and that people's human rights are not being undermined. And it's against that backdrop that the objectives of the bill are absolutely correct in setting up a biometrics commissioner to oversee the collection and retention of biometrics data. I think the process has been interesting. You know, I think the government have worked collaboratively with all parties and also with the committee, and we've seen the bill strengthened as it's gone through stage 2 and stage 3, and I think that's how the parliamentary process should work. I think particularly in regard to compliance, and originally the way the bill was drafted, it basically stated that the Biometrics Commissioner needed to have regard people needed to have regard to the work of the Biometrics Commissioner, and we had a great debate in the committee around whether have regard was strong enough, and I certainly argued that there should be stronger compliance than have regard, and that amendments with that theme in it were passed at stage 2, and I think that does make the compliance much stronger. Similarly, in regard to the complaints process, that was a gap in the original drafting of the bill. I think it was well intentioned from the point of view that it was felt that the Information Commissioner could deal with any complaints. However, I think as a number of contributors have said this afternoon, it's important to ensure public confidence, and potentially that public confidence could have been undermined by the lack of a direct complaints process to the Biometrics Commissioner, where people felt there were issues around the way their data was being held. So the amendments that have been brought through at stage 2 and then refined at stage 3 build a proper complaints process in, and also give clarity around what complaints are relevant to the Information Commissioner and what complaints go to the Biometrics Commissioner. I think another important aspect is the importance of the advisory group. As a Law Society cited in their submission, future-proofing in this area is very important to take account of new developments in technology, and it's important to be able to draw on relevant expertise, and from that point of view the setting up of an advisory group is something that makes the process much more robust. And I think being able to keep all that under review, including the issues of resources, will also ensure that all these issues are taken into account. So in summing up, Deputy Presiding Officer, I think the process has been a good and positive one for the Parliament and also for the Government in taking the bill through the Parliament, building on some of the discussions and the evidence that has taken place and making the end product a robust one which Parliament and the public will have confidence in.
Thank you very much, Mr Kerr. I call on John Finney to open for the Green Party.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. A lot of similarity, I'm sure, with a lot of what we're going to say. Can I agree with the Cabinet Secretary, the good work of John Scott and QC and his committee that gets us to this point. And the point we're at is where we're going to pass, hopefully, and the Scottish Green Party will certainly be supporting it, a piece of legislation that will establish a new Biometrics Commissioner. And the explanatory note is very specific, as you would imagine. It says, who will support and promote the adoption of lawful, effective and ethical practices in relation to biometric data in a policing and criminal justice context, and do so by keeping under review the law, policy and practice relating to acquisition, retention, use and destruction. Now, as has been said by others, I think public confidence in our criminal justice system is vital, and the way that this bill has been progressed, it starts off as a sound enough piece of legislation, but the engagement that there's been, I think, has been extremely positive, and dare I say it, a fine example of how the committee system can work, and the engagement with the Cabinet Secretary and his colleagues is appreciated. So I think it is stronger as a result of what's taken place. The policy memorandum talks about how rapidly evolving this is an area of work, and as has been said, it's right to strike a balance and say that elsewhere, and I quote here, greater potential in detection, prevention and prosecution of crime. And we would all see that, and we would know that in the last 30 years DNA testing has resulted in, has been central to serious crime, murder and sexual offences being solved. And in that period, of course, we've seen laptops, phones, CCTV, security cameras, road cameras, automatic number plate recognition, collecting, storing and using large volumes of biometric data. So I think it was right in the Justice Committee Stage 1 report when we said that this was timely and necessary, this piece of legislation. And that the oversight will be of the various things, as the reference has been made to facial recognition, facial search technology, gait and movement recognition technology, eye, iris, retinal identification, voice recognition software, and data from social media that's capable of providing sources to the police. Second generation, I'm advised. And it's important that this functions independently. This was said in the report, with no perceptions of overt influence from police-relating bodies. And I think, excuse me, the amendment at stage 2, which saw a requirement to comply, is significant because I went back today and I had a look what police were telling us, and police told us, and they were relaxed with I have regard to, they were saying, this is similar to recommendations coming from HMC, ICS, and they said, quote, we generally work to implement its recommendations. There can't be discussions about this. These are very, very important matters, and one of the policy objectives outlined in the legislation was improving the accountability of the police. So I'm pleased that policing in Scotland, excuse me, will include the British Transport Police, and that PERC are involved given their pivotal role in this. The Independent Advisory Group talked about a complaint mechanism within the bill, so I was very keen to support our convener in the very important amendments that's been brought forward. The group been put in statutory footing, the Liam MacArthur's amendments, I think, and the advice and information source that they can provide, I think, is very important. The Scottish public's under heavy surveillance, and it's very important that we get things right. So I particularly thank the Scottish Government for working with me on the technology amendments. I think this is a good piece of legislation, and we'll support it at decision time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call Liam MacArthur over for the Liberal Democrats. Mr MacArthur, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I echo the comments of others in confirming that Scottish Liberal Democrats warmly welcome the bill and be supporting it at decision time shortly. And again, can I thank all those who helped the committee during the process of our scrutiny, and like the Cabinet Secretary and John Finney, pay particular tribute to John Scott and his colleagues on the advisory group for the work that they did in laying the foundations. Can I also thank the Cabinet Secretary for the very constructive approach that he adopted in relation to this bill. I mean, given how competitive our exchanges around policing can get in this chamber, it is quite nice to have the experience that I think we've gone through in relation to this bill. The case for establishing a biometrics commissioner to oversee the collection, use, retention and importantly deletion of biometrics is well made and now I think widely accepted. Biometrics is an area of policy that is complex, highly technical, and where technology and its use are evolving at an astonishing pace. The robust regulatory framework and the specific expertise to oversee it are non-negotiables if we are to retain public confidence, while also allowing our police and the justice system to have access to the tools that they will increasingly need. Thanks to legislation passed in 2006 and 2010, we already have a legal framework governing the use of DNA and fingerprints. In 2015, however, it emerged that pictures of 330,000 Scots who had been taken into custody had been made available to users of the Police National Database. Many of the individuals concerned had done nothing wrong, and this prompted my colleague Alison McInnes to spearhead a campaign for effective regulation of biometrics. She wrote to the First Minister at the time demanding a review of facial recognition technology, leading to HMICS undertaking their assessment. During consideration of the 2016 Criminal Justice Act, Alison McInnes lodged amendments to make biometric information subject to the same rules as DNA and fingerprints. She recognised the importance of consistency, including around the timely deletion of images. Although unsuccessful, Alison McInnes' efforts paved the way for my own amendments passed by Parliament earlier this afternoon, and these will achieve consistency, a consistency that is in the interests not just of individuals in the wider public, but indeed the police, who have been clear in their belief that what's needed is both consistency and clarity, albeit with some flexibility, as the Cabinet Secretary mentioned earlier, to deal with specific circumstances. I acknowledge the support from the Scottish Government on these changes, as I do over the moves to put the proposed advisory group on a statutory footing. As I said in moving my amendments earlier, putting this group on the face of the bill sends a strong signal about the importance its work has in helping underpin all that the Commissioner does. This better reflects the recommendations of the IAG and hopefully addresses what was described by the Scottish Human Rights Commission as a regrettable omission from the original bill. Likewise, I think we've made progress today on the question of enforcement powers. I appreciate some stakeholders may wish to have seen us go further, while previously the Government had argued that the threat of naming and shaming was sufficient by way of a deterrent. By agreeing to ensure that breaches are made public by the Commissioner, safer in the most minor of circumstances, however, I believe we increase the likelihood of encouraging good practice and reduce the risk of individuals or organisations seeking to chance their arm. And the final area where I think an important step in the right direction has been taken today relates to the way in which we ensure this legislation keeps pace with the development of biometrics. Putting in place a robust regulatory framework is essential, as is ensuring it is overseen by those with the necessary expertise. However, there's no getting away from the fact that biometrics is rapidly evolving. We need to make sure that reviews are built in so that the public can have confidence that the framework and safeguards remain fit for purpose. And again, I welcome the Government's and Parliament's support for my amendments to allow such a review mechanism. Deputy Presiding Officer, Met Commissioner Dame Cressida Dick observed that while police should take advantage of new technology to improve policing, it is not for the police service to draw up the rules by which that technology is used. She is right, but so too are Amnesty International when they warn that use of biometrics has the potential to breach human rights such as the right to privacy, freedom of association and the right to peaceful assembly. That is why we need a robust regulatory framework and a biometrics commissioner with the necessary powers. And I believe that this bill gives us gets us much of the way there. The Scottish Liberal Democrats on that basis will be supporting the bill this evening.
Thank you, Mr McArthur, and I call Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As Deputy Convener of the Justice Committee, I'm glad we've reached the final stage of this very important bill in a largely consensual way, as the Cabinet Secretary said. Can I thank the Clerks and Bill team for their hard work and thank the many excellent witnesses for helping us with their expertise in this field. A lot of work and a lot of listening has gone into getting the bill to a stage where we have thankfully achieved cross-party support. And I agree with Liam MacArthur that it is now a much better and a more balanced bill. The bill will ensure that the use of biometric data in policing and criminal justice is effective, lawful and ethical. It's vital that the public have confidence in the bill and that the ethics in respect of human rights surrounding the bill have been addressed. The scope of the bill covers the acquisition, use, retention and disposal of biometric data, including fingerprints, DNA and current emerging techniques such as iris recognition. The ultimate goal is to keep communities safe while respecting the rights of the individual and improving the accountability of the police. These are the important elements in maintaining public confidence in police use of biometric data. And it is hugely important in prevention, detection and prosecuting of crime. Of course, the use of biometrics identification by police is not a new phenomenon. In Scotland, police services have been using criminal history photographs and fingerprints for more than 100 years. And over the last 30 years, the use of human DNA testing has become a central tool in detecting and prosecuting crime, particularly serious crimes such as murder and sexual offences. So the need for a commissioner independent of government, the police and the criminal justice system was a key recommendation in both the 2016 HMICS review and the 2018 Independent Advisory Group report, and was widely welcomed by all witnesses who gave evidence to the committee. The Commissioner for the Retention and Use of Biometric Materials, Professor Wells, stated that the bill places Scotland at the forefront of legislating for the oversight of biometric data in the field of criminal justice. He said many other countries are quite interested in what Scotland is doing because they're all aware that they will have similar issues. So, Presiding Officer, important amendments were made at stage 2 and the Government has worked with members across the Chamber to incorporate their requests to shape the bill in the best possible form. So much of what I'll say has already been said, but here's a sample of some of the agreed amendments brought forward. It was amended to enable Scottish ministers to change or clarify the meaning of biometric data by regulations. This will allow Parliament to scrutinise any changes that Scottish ministers propose as technology advances at pace. An amendment was also agreed to allow for further process in the first Code of Practice being agreed by Parliament as recommended by the committee. Parliament agreed at stage 2 to add the PERT to the list of bodies, and I think that's important, subject to the Commissioner's oversight. Amendments were also voted in to require the Commissioner to set up a complaints procedure and to operate an advisory group. And as we've heard, the complaints procedure was one of the things that was discussed strongly, featured strongly, and I'm pleased that the Convener's Amendment has been passed. The committee accepted the Scottish Government's amendments to enhance the existing powers of the Commissioner to deal with failures to comply with the Code of Practice. The bill was amended to establish an advisory group, again something the committee felt strongly about. So this removes the role, any role for the Scottish ministers and instead allows the Commissioner to make decisions on the administration and procedure of the group, and also in remuneration and membership with the consent of the SPCB. So the intention is that this makes for a more impartial group whose remit and membership are tailored to the requirements of the Commissioner. Presiding Officer, I believe this important bill ensures that this Parliament has future-proofed and locked in all the necessary safeguards necessary for Scotland to deal with the evolving technology now necessary for the detection, prevention and prosecution of crime. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Closing speeches. I call on James Kelly to close for Labour. Mr Kelly, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Pleased to close in this debate on behalf of the Scottish Labour Party. We will be supporting the passage of the bill at decision time, which comes up shortly. I think it's been a very useful and an example of a good way for a bill to progress through the Parliament. It's been a very consensual discussion this afternoon. However, at the earlier stages, there were differences of opinion. You know, those were exchanged in a collegiate manner, and I'm glad to say that a lot of the differences of opinion, there's been a consensual way forward worked out, which I think is to the credit of the Cabinet Secretary and also to the opposition spokespeople and the Justice Committee for the way that the process has been conducted. I was struck when John Finney was speaking, when he railed through all the different sort of technology that's now available to police and prosecutors in terms of collecting data, and it took me back to the first the first kind of job I effectively had was with Greater Glasgow Health Board in 1982, and when I went into the office there was only one computer in the whole office. And when you hear John Finney railing off what's available now, both in terms of laptops, mobile technology, voice recognition, and of course we've got the advent of facial recognition technology, that means that the police have a lot more at their disposal, which is good in terms of investigating crime and bringing people who have committed those crimes to justice. However, it then means that the challenges are much more great in terms of ensuring that the ethics and human rights are not compromised. And from that point of view, this bill has got a very important role to play. And that kind of links into getting this right is important, as Liam Kerr stressed, in terms of winning the public trust. Because if the public are going to have proper confidence in this area of data, biometric data, then the role of a biometrics commissioner can help in that regard. You know, I can't stress enough how the powers potentially that police and prosecutors have got in terms of being able to collect and retain data, and being able to use that properly and responsibly is of great advantage to the victims of crime, but they also must ensure that they've got public trust. The Cabinet Secretary in that regard emphasised the importance of expertise, and I think some of the changes that have been made as we've moved through the process will be able to draw on that expertise. So the setting up of an advisory group and the passing of the amendments that Liam MacArthur brought forward at stage 2 and stage 3 will help. I also think that the process has been enhanced by greater compliance measures been introduced by the bill that we'll consider shortly at decision time. I think the introduction of a proper complaints process, which streamlines it along the proper routes for the Biometrics Commissioner and the Information Commissioner is helpful. And I do think that, as Liam Kerr pointed out, the issue of resources is an important one, and that should be kept under review. And the review process that's built into the bill will help in that regard. So pleased to support the passage of this bill at decision time. I think the process has been a good one, and we now have a more robust process in place, which the public, I'm sure, will have confidence in.
Thank you, and I call on Margaret Mitchell to close the Conservatives. Ms Mitchell.
Officer, can I start by welcoming the introduction of the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner Bill. Digital technology has advanced considerably over the past 25 years, and biometrics is one of the most rapidly developing technologies. Biometric data itself is both highly sensitive and intrusive data. It's evolved from first generation biometrics, such as fingerprints and DNA, to second generation technology like facial recognition software, which presents both opportunities and challenges. There is therefore a need for a balance between ensuring that the police have the tools they need to keep the public safe, while also protecting individuals' privacy. And here I'd like to thank the Justice Clerks for the sterling work that they've done assisting the committee achieve that balance. The bill provides that the Commissioner has several different functions: a general role to support and promote the adoption of lawful, effective and ethical practices of biometric data by the police and criminal justice system. This includes how biometric data is acquired, used, retained and destroyed. Moreover, the bill tasks the Commissioner with keeping under review the laws, policies, practices relating to biometric data by Police Scotland, the SPA and PERC. And furthermore, the Commissioner must prepare, promote, monitor compliance with the Code of Practice and promote public awareness and understanding of Police Scotland's, the SPA and PERC's powers and duties relating to biometric data. These powers ensure that the Commissioner is able to hold the police and criminal justice system to account for their use of biometrics. The Bill's Code of Practice governs the collection, use and retention of public's biometric data by the police. And after hearing the evidence presented at stage 1, the Justice Committee deemed that the inclusion of a complaints mechanism was essential to ensure that any member of the public could raise their concern with the Commissioner about police compliance or possible breaches of the Code of Practice. And I want to thank the Cabinet Secretary for responding positively to my amendment, putting in place the complaints procedure, and for the collaborative manner in which the Scottish Government and its officials have worked with me to amend and improve this provision in the bill. The Commissioner will be required to publicise this complaints procedure. This should increase public awareness of their rights and bolster public confidence in the use of biometrics by the police. In the Stage 1 report, the committee also stressed that the bill would need to be strengthened in order to ensure that the Commissioner is able to provide robust oversight. So other improvements, therefore, include John Finney's amendment, which provides Police Scotland, DSP and PERC have a duty to comply with the Code of Practice, and amendments also by John Finney, which future-proof the use of different new technology. And Liam MacArthur's amendment, including a presumption in favour of the deletion of biometrics after a prescribed minimum retention period where there is a gap in the law in this respect, and the creation of an independent advisory group with oversight both open and flexible. So in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, the Justice Committee's scrutiny of the Scottish Commissioner, Scottish Biometric Commissioner Bill has, I believe, been an example of effective and collaborative and cooperative working between the committee and the Scottish Government to ensure that the legislation is fit for purpose. And I think it's one of the best examples of how this Parliament can work effectively to get the very best legislation possible. And the Scottish Conservatives will have much pleasure in supporting the bill this evening.
Thank you, Ms Mitchell. I call on Hamza Youssef to close the Scottish Government. Cabinet Secretary, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm really grateful for members for their contributions and what's been a very constructive, consensual debate. As I said in my opening remarks, the bill has enjoyed strong cross-party support from the start, but that doesn't happen by accident, as members have alluded to. It happens because of the open-mindedness of opposition members. I hope also they recognise the open-mindedness of Scottish Government, but really I want to thank those that we don't often hear about or don't often see at the forefront. They are, for example, the clerks at the Justice Committee, officials led ably by Elaine Hamilton, David Scott, Laura Barry from PCO and David Murdoch, SGLD, and the whole team behind them, but also to get that cross-party support. Let me make a special mention of that much maligned political creature, the SPAD, the Special Advisor, John McFarlane, very well known to each of the opposition spokespeople here, who's done an excellent job actually of working with my officials and myself and opposition members to get this bill to a place, as I say, that where every single amendment at stage 3 has been accepted by every member. That is a really positive place for this bill to be. But I take Margaret Mitchell's point as well that this bill was not just about consensus. I'm pleased we've got to that point. It was about effective scrutiny. We saw that effective scrutiny from the Justice Committee. We saw the range of views from the stakeholders, and some of those stakeholders continue to challenge us. The Scottish Human Rights Commission, for example, continue to challenge us, and no doubt will continue their engagement once that independent biometrics commissioner is very much appointed. I just wanted to focus on a few remarks made by speakers today. Liam Kerr, I thought, very importantly focused his remarks on public trust, hugely important, of course, because all of us can think of examples of data breaches, data leaks, and of course, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, many of us undoubtedly have been approached by members of the public around their concerns around data privacy, and therefore public trust has to be at the forefront of what we do. So therefore having an independent commissioner with that oversight over biometrics data, I think will help to give those reassurances and strengthen public trust. Ultimately in policing, whenever I speak to the Chief Constable, or indeed anybody involved in policing, but particularly the Chief Constable, I know he always references the fact that he gets, policing get their consent from the people. They don't get consent from the government, they don't get consent from Parliament. The consent for policing, the legitimacy of policing, comes from consent from the people, and therefore that can only happen when you have public trust. So I thought it was an important point made by Liam Kerr. He did ask me about finances and resources, and James Kelly in his closing remarks also asked about that, and I just reiterate what I've said before, that it's right, of course, that the government keeps under review any representations that are made, for example, by the SPCB in respect to the resourcing provision of the Office of the Commissioner as part of the annual budget setting process. But also I'm very confident that costings in the financial memorandum and supplementary financial memorandum are comprehensive. They do represent the best estimates at the time present, but clearly the Commissioner, he or she, will produce the code of practice, and therefore we'll have to keep that under review, and I think that's important. James Kelly, I thought, made some excellent remarks around how we have a stronger bill because of that collaboration, but that we have a stronger, and we will have a stronger Commissioner because of those changes. So those changes, and he referenced, I thought, the important changes that we've made in relation to the Commissioner having regards to the code of practice. Sorry, not the Commissioner, policing bodies having regards to the code of practice, to now having to comply with that code of practice. And I agree with him that has led to a stronger bill, but hopefully a stronger Commissioner and a stronger regulatory framework around biometrics. John Finney was absolutely right to make the point about the fact that we have this legislation is both timely but also necessary. I know, to his credit, John Finney has often been at the forefront in relation to human rights, and I think he pushed us, the government, very hard on these matters during committee stage in particular, and I hope that we have met not just his expectations, but rightly many of the human rights organisations the length and breadth of the country. John Finney was also right to make mention of the pace at which technology changes. Dare I say it, when he first became a police officer in 1976 and Lothian Borders Constabulary, and then of course a dog handler in Northern Constabulary. Of course he, only at the age of 5, I should say, presiding officer, that he would not have envisaged the pace at which technology has advanced, and that of course police officers are now faced with. And I think that's a really important point, because as the chair of the Serious Organised Crime Task Force, I know that police are always wanting to ensure and investing to ensure that they keep up to pace with criminals, because the criminal serious organised crime gangs, they do not have to worry about ethics. Of course they don't. They don't have to worry about procurement rules. They don't have to worry about legislation. They procure the technology that they require to make the criminal transactions that they do through the black market. So it's essential that we allow the police the ability to invest in technology to keep a pace or be ahead of criminals, but at the same time ensure that the public are reassured around their data, around privacy, around the ethical considerations. So I think that's a really important point made by John Finney. Lee MacArthur was right to, again, reference some of those human rights considerations. I think important to remind us that this bill didn't just come or materialise out of thin air. It came from a lot of hard work. Yes, by John Scott, but I think he was also right to reference his colleague Alison McInnes. I sat beside her at Justice Committee many moons ago, and of course she kept me right often in that committee. But she, of course, alongside many members, a champion of human rights. So from the conversations that Alison McInnes had when she was an MSP in this Parliament, right the way through to the good work that John Scott has done, this bill is really an accumulative effort by a lot of different actors from a lot of different political parties and external to this Parliament, and we've got to a very strong place. Indeed, Rona Mackay made some excellent remarks around the independence of the Commissioner, and through the process of this legislation, I think we've strengthened that independence of the Commissioner, for example, in terms of the appointment of the advisory group. And Margaret Mitchell, to conclude, made some excellent points in and around the complaints process which she has been the champion for and led on in relation to this bill. And she's right to make the point that I think the Scottish public will look towards the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner for when it comes to potential breaches of any code of practice, and therefore having that now in the bill and as a function of the Biometrics Commission, I think is an excellent place for us to be. So to conclude, Presiding Officer, I think we have an excellent bill. I really want to thank all of the opposition spokespeople and indeed all the officials that have been involved in this to get us to this stage, a very constructive, collaborative approach. But more important to that, regardless of the approach, we now at the end stage have a biometrics, or will have a biometrics commissioner with a code of practice that will hopefully give members of the public an absolute assurance that while we want the police and those involved in policing to invest in technology to keep our streets safe, they'll also be reassured, on the other hand, that their data and their biometrics data will have a regulatory framework around it that will protect their rights and take on board their ethical considerations. So, Presiding Officer, I'm delighted to move this bill in my name, and I look forward to receiving, I hope, unanimous support in a few seconds' time. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner Bill. A short pause before we move on to the next item of business.